The Churches of Christ present Speaking the Truth in Love, a program bringing you life's answers from the Word of God.
Thank you for joining our program today. I'm James Johnson, the minister of Nettleton Church of Christ in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Our program is brought to you by the area Churches of Christ, which are listed at the end of the program. To help you grow in your relationship with God, we're offering free resources on both our Facebook page and our website. Our speaker today is Seth Parnell, the minister of Portia Church of Christ in Portia, Arkansas.
Christ for the world we sing, the world to Christ we bring, with loving zeal, the poor and helpless born, the faint and overborne, sin sick and sorrow born, whom Christ doth heal. Christ for the world we sing, the world to Christ we bring, with fervent prayer, the wayward and the lost, by restless passions tossed, redeemed and helpless gods from dark despair. Christ for the world we sing, the world to Christ we bring, with one accord, with us the work to share, with us reproach to bear, with us the cross to bear, for Christ our Lord.
There are many things in our world today that have a great symbol about it. They present a message just by their very appearance. You can look at something and instantly, determine kind of the message, that it brings and the kind of the information that it conveys. You think about a simple coin, that we have. You can look at the image on it, and you can look at the words that are inscribed on it, and instantly see what country it belongs to, and how much it's worth. In a business sense. You think of other kind of striking symbols, such as the Statue of Liberty that we see. That's a national symbol, of our country. It represents, freedom. It represents, things characteristics and ideals that are associated, with our country. And that can be quite interesting to just be able to look at something and see, like I said, the message that it has. But that also can be in a negative sense as well. As we know, it can go both ways, in a positive and a negative sense. But it's that we find this all throughout, at least our country and in our lives, and also all throughout, the Bible, as well. You think of certain, times throughout the Scriptures in which individuals struggled with what is called idolatry. Idolatry is the worship of false gods. It is the worship of these creations of man, things that are made of wood or stone or metal, things that they crafted together, sometimes skillfully, sometimes crudely. They would kind these things and then bow down and worship them, and give them praise, sacrifice to them even. There's even some kind of heartbreaking scenes throughout the Old Testament in which people would actually sacrifice people to these constructed gods, and they would go to great lengths in order to worship these things and to just give their hope to them, to trust that they would carry them through to the end. But in the end, we know that's one of the things that God warned Israel about from the very, very start. If you remember in Exodus chapter 20, in one of the great passages in the Bible in which the Ten Commandments are given. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, and he is given what is the start of the old law. As we know, the entirety of the old law was much more than just the Ten Commandments, but the Ten Commandments form the pillar, kind of the base of what it was to be. And that is what we have there in Exodus chapter 20. And one of the very first things that is addressed in these commands, in these tablets of stone, was, "You shall worship no other gods before me." God was not interested in being shared upon other lesser and meaningless constructions of mankind, but He is the one true God. He is the creator of the world, creator of the universe. He has all authority and all power, and He was not going to be shared among those lesser things. And so that's something that He addresses, like we said, very quickly, throughout when He's giving His commands, to Israel. He wanted them to be a nation that was an example of His qualities, an example of His mission. And sometimes they did well in that. Sometimes they did not do so well. They struggled at times, just like we do today. Sometimes we can be an image of Christ. We can be a light to the world, and sometimes we fail in that regard. And we look a lot more like the world than we would like to think. But Israel, when they would leave Egypt, they would have some great success. But then that success would soon be tested with what they were going to face. And so that's what we're going to talk about with our lesson right now. But if you take a look at 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 3, this is what the writer records. He says, "Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in His ways and keeping His statutes, His commandments, His rules, and His testimonies, as is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do wherever you turn." And this is not the only passage that has a similar kind of language to it, but he says to keep the charge of the Lord your God, that they have been charged in order to keep His law, in order to keep His commandments, in order to follow after His ways. He says walking in His ways and keeping His statutes, His commandments, His rules, and His testimonies. That's what they were called to do. And it is, essentially, the mission that they had in this world. They're often referred to as, God's chosen people, as the people in which that were blessed, by God. And we know eventually, the Messiah, the Son of God, the salvation of the world would come from Israel, from the tribe of Judah. But before that, even before that time would come, they were supposed to be that living light, that living example throughout the world. And as we mentioned before, they would have great success, and also they would have struggle at times with that. But if you remember the history of Israel, you can go all the way back to the story of Joseph. Joseph was an interesting character that we read about in the Scriptures. He was somebody who was favored as a child. As if you remember, it's a common a Bible school story about the coat of many colors and that he was given. But eventually his brothers became angry with him. They sold him into slavery, and he found himself in a foreign country in Egypt as a slave. But God did not abandon him in that sense, but He rescued him. He was with him, and through the course of several years, Joseph went from somebody who was a slave, with nothing to his name, to the second in command, to Pharaoh himself, and played a direct hand in the saving of thousands and thousands of people from a famine, that would come. His descendants would stay in that land, and eventually his father and his family would come to Egypt to live. And that from that place, the nation of Israel would blossom into a very, very large group of people. And they would be successful in what they did until Pharaoh looked out among these people, one who did not know Joseph. He did not know, his Joseph's father. He did not know, any of the. He did not experience any of the relationships that he had, with them, and so he looks at Israel and he says, if a foreign power should invade our land and Israel would turn against them, we would be destroyed. And so he made the decision to enslave Israel, and that would maintain the status for about 400 years. For about 400 years, Israel would be enslaved to the Egyptians, and that would cause a lot of anguish. They said that they would cry out to God because of the hard labor, because of the mistreatment that they would experience, and they would cry out to God for deliverance. That deliverance would eventually come in the form of a man by the name of Moses, who wasn't the quickest in order to take up this mission, this responsibility. He had a lot of reasons not to take this on, as we usually do. It's usually a lot easier to think of reasons why we can't do something than it is for reasons why we should. But Moses, he eventually came around. With the help of his brother Aaron, he would go to Egypt and he would free Israel through the power of God. If you remember the story of the 10 plagues and how God demonstrated his power to one of the most powerful men on the planet at that time, the Pharaoh of Egypt. But through that process, Israel was able to be freed from Egypt, and they were able to travel to what they called and what God called the Promised Land, a land that God had promised to them, a land flowing with milk and honey, a prosperous land that they would able to be successful in, they would able to thrive in as a newly freed people. They had great success in what they were doing, but in this success, they face some problems. They face some challenges in this success that they had. As oftentimes, sometimes it's our weakest moments are sometimes our best. When we are having the most success, sometimes we kind of diminish our need for God and our reliance on God, and that makes us vulnerable to what Satan would throw at us. And so I think this was true also for Israel at this time. In their height of goodness and success, they would cross the Red Sea through miraculous means, and they would be provided by God throughout this wilderness, something that should be impossible by other means. But yet, throughout this success, they would end up misplacing their trust in where it should be, and that would end up costing them dearly. In Proverbs chapter 3 and verses 3 through 4, this is what the writer of Proverbs says. He says, "Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart, so that you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man." How does you find success according to Proverbs chapter 3? He says you dedicate yourself to steadfast love and faithfulness, and you keep that close to you. You bind that close to your heart. If something is close to your heart, that means it is solid. That means that it is there, and it makes up your being and who you are. And that's something that's very very important. And so this is the kind of the formula that they should have followed, that they should have followed in order to be as a successful nation. But as we know from the story, this is not to be. Moses would go up to this mountain and he would have this conversation with God. God would provide him with these tablets of stone, these law that he wanted Israel to follow, that would mold them into the type of people that they needed to be. But while Moses was up there, there was restlessness among the camp, and they gave in to a temptation that they needed something in order to put their trust in, even though it was empty, even though that it was hollow. It would be something that they could see, and so their success would be misplaced. And we see it in Exodus chapter 20, and we see it in other places as well, as how God cautioned them against this. In Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 4, it says, "Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves any gods of cast metal, for I am the Lord your God." He says, don't turn to idols or make any of these images, because I am the Lord your God. I am the one who is with you and who will lead you forward. That is who I am. But they would convince Aaron, to make for them a golden calf. They would bring together, all the gold that they had, and they would melt it down and create this golden calf in order to worship, so that they could, worship it. They could put their trust in it, and they could say, "This is what brought us out of Egypt." It wasn't, the one true God, but it was this golden calf that had the power to bring us out of Egypt. And this would be a serious mistake. Because as the writer of Habakkuk, he would tell us in Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 18, he says, "What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it, a metal image, a teacher of lies? For its maker trusts his own creation when he makes speechless idols." He says, what profit is an idol when a maker has shaped it, you informed it, and you created it? He says there's no goodness in it. There's no value to it, because it's empty. It's a lie. It is hollow. And so they give themselves over to this false god, and they begin to embrace all types of immorality in the process, which is a common thread that you will see throughout the Bible and in life as well. When God is absent, oftentimes things devolve into greater and greater amounts of immorality, and unrighteousness, and things that are destructive to people, things that aren't conducive to goodness or growth or any of those positive things. But when God is absent, a lot of times the things that take its place are what the devices of Satan. And that is certainly something that happens here. But as I would always talk about, these, they had the initiative in order to put this idol in the place of God, to put it in a situation in which they could really determine what the rules were. They God would give them these commands and principles, as I talked about earlier, in order to follow. But if you create this metal image that cannot think, that cannot reason, that does not have a soul, that does not have any cognitive capacity, then essentially you can create whatever rules you would like. You can create whatever standard you want to live by and apply that to this image. And in the end, I believe this is what Israel did. They misplaced the reason for their success in this golden calf and in this false idol. And people still do that a lot today. A lot of times we may misplace the cause and the reason for our success, and to either ourself in our own workings and our own activity, or it's in sometimes people attribute their success to something quite abstract, like fate or luck or something like that, and they give that as the reason for their success. But when we think about the goodness that we have in this world today, the blessings that we have, in the end you can only trace it back to one source. There is only one source that gives us everything that we need for a daily life, and for the things that we enjoy on a everyday basis. God is the one who created not only us in ourselves, but also in our being, but also this world that we enjoy and that we look out upon. A lot of the wonderful scenes that you can look out and see in nature. God, He created those. He crafted those with His spoken word. The light that shines throughout the daytime, when the sun rises and you're able to see all of His creation without any assistance. That's the working of God. And so if we're somebody who follows or does not learn from the example of Israel, and chases after and misplaces the reason for our success in earthly things, then what are we going to end up with as our reward? We're going to end up with those earthly things, things that have no eternal value, things that in the end are going to be quite empty. But as we kind of look at the end of the story, I think there's a conclusion that we can come to that really kind of enlightens the motivation for why they would do this. Because in the end, we always wonder, like, why would they, put all their trust in something that is just an object, something that is just, a piece of metal, or wood? I mean, aren't they, smarter than that? Don't they have more intelligence than that? Why would they have why would they full sail, give themselves to this simple, object, to this simple item? I believe in the end, the true idol was not this golden calf. It was not this construction that they made, but the true idol was themselves. And it was the ability to do basically whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and to live in unrighteousness, as they certainly embraced during this time. God cautions against that. In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 5, Paul, in talking to his people, he says, "Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry." He even mentions idolatry by name in that section. But he says, these things need to be put to death, because there's no value, there's no spiritual value in these things, but rather it all ends up being self-destructive by its nature. But they wanted to put off the righteousness of God and wanted to give themselves fully over to this behavior of immorality, and that's exactly what they did. It's no surprise, and it's no shock that whenever you read about the worship of pagan temples, when you ever read about the worship of the false gods that were around during that time, in which they built great temples too in the ancient world, and when we read about the case with Israel, whether it be in this particular case and with the golden calf, or whether it be other instances later on, as soon as they start worshiping these false idols, they always quickly devolve into this behavior of unrighteousness. Because when you serve yourself, and that's all that you serve, in the end, that is what you get, and you spiral deeper and deeper into that unrighteousness, and that is what that's what they experienced in this regard. In Romans chapter 2 and verse 8, it says, "But for those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, there will be wrath and fury." That's the caution that Paul gives to the Romans about being self-seeking, about seeking after only yourself. He says, in the end, they're not going to be in line for that reward, but there will be wrath and fury. Just as we know from this story, if you read after the case that we have here in the book of Exodus, Israel faced consequences for this betrayal of God, for this act of kind of usurping the authority of God, and they faced some serious consequences for it. And in the end, the idol was destroyed. And there was a number of people who lost their life in that judgment. And so we want to be a people that does not fall into the same traps, into the same mistakes as those were before. Paul will tell us that what was written before time was written for our learning, so that we can learn from the stories. We can learn from the examples of people, both good and bad. We can emulate the positive qualities of some of these individuals that we read about, and the good decisions that they made. And we can also learn from the mistakes that they make as well, and in the times in which they messed up. And certainly there's a good balance of those. As we know, the Bible records people as they are, not in a kind of idealistic sense. We have many characters in the Bible. We have both good and bad scenes from them. Times in which they excelled in their service to God, and times in which they failed. And that's that's how we are as well. You may have times in which you are at the height of faithfulness. You are a light of the world. You are shining everywhere. But there's also times in which you find yourself spiritually speaking, flat on your face, in which you have fallen, and you are know that you are not where you need to be. But fortunately, God always gives us a chance in order to change. In 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15, this is what Paul says to Timothy. He says, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, for rightly handling the word of truth." He says, present yourself to God as one approved. He says to rightly handle the word of truth when there's no need in order to be ashamed. And so that should be a charge that we should take to, and that we should give to ourselves as well. To be somebody who can present ourselves to God as one who is approved, as one who is a worker, one who puts their trust in not something that is empty, but in something that is eternal, in something that has the light and goodness about it, to where it can make a real difference, not only in this world, but also in the one to come. We have so much to look forward to as Christians, so much to be thankful for, and that's certainly something that we can see with this case as well. And so, don't put your trust in something that is empty, something that is hollow, but put it in the one true God. Because if we follow His commands and His precepts, we know that we can lead us to that eternal reward in heaven.
If you have a Bible question, would like to receive a free Bible correspondence course, would like a copy of free books, please contact the Nettleton Church of Christ. Speaking the Truth in Love is brought to you by these area churches of Christ. Speaking the Truth in Love can be viewed online at nettletonchurchofchrist.org.